This was supposed to be the week when Trump was supposed to deliver on his big ultimatum for Vladimir Putin. End the war in Ukraine or else face new crippling economic sanctions. That was the ultimatum. What Trump did instead, though, is bow completely to Putin. Today, Trump announced that he would be meeting with the Russian president face-to-face next Friday in Alaska on U.S. soil, an added bonus for the Russians. But wait, there's more. Earlier today, when asked whether Ukraine, who was invaded by Russia 3.5 years ago and has been defending itself ever since, would have to give up its territory, Trump gave this little clue about what a peace deal could entail.
We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
The betterment of both. Quite a turn of phrase. This is Ukraine's territory. I'm not sure what he means, the betterment of both. Now, make no mistake, that was the president of the United States capitulating to Russia in advance of a meeting with Putin. So today was kind of a big win for Russia, which is why one could imagine that in the Kremlin tonight, it's vodka shots all around, perhaps. Joining me now is former U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama, Michael McFaul, who I should add speaks regularly with Ukraine's President Zelensky and knows a whole lot about these issues, as you all know. Ambassador McFaul, I mean, I just gave my short take on this meeting, but what do you think?
Jen, that was a pretty good take. That's exactly what I think. This is an extraordinary gift to Putin, just like you said. As you remember, when we worked together at the White House, anytime a foreign leader meets with the president of the United States, that's a gift. That it is Vladimir Putin that can't travel to a lot of countries because he's a criminal, and that he gets to come to the United States of America and stand next to the president of the United States is a gift. He's already received everything he needs. The question, therefore, for President Trump and his team, what are we getting in return for America's national interests, for Europe's interests, and for Ukraine's interests? And so far, the details on that are very murky. The clip you just played about swaps, you're absolutely right. He's talking about swapping Ukrainian land for Ukrainian land. He's not talking about Russian land being swapped. And I can tell you the reaction in Ukraine among officials, this feels very nervous. They're very nervous about this, especially because President Zelensky's not going to be in Alaska. It's just going to be Putin and Trump.
I mean, I think that is for Trump being played, that is part of it. But what happens next week at this meeting and where does it go, to your point? I mean, Putin told the Trump administration this week that Russia would agree to a ceasefire of Ukraine if Ukraine handed over eastern Ukraine, which it would be an absurd thing for them to do. But is that kind of a fear? Is that something that you think is possible in this meeting, that Trump could potentially agree to that?
Well, first, I'm glad you pointed out what Putin's talking point is, because it's been the same since he started this war, this barbaric invasion of the sovereign democratic country of Ukraine. He says, give us the territories that we already put on our map as being part of Russia, right? You buy a map in Russia today, those 4 regions are already part of the Russian Federation, but Russian soldiers don't occupy those 4 regions. So he has this audacious talking point that the Ukrainians need to liberate their own country, and then we can have peace. I hope the president has enough good sense to reject that. And I hope there may be some small steps, maybe some kind of temporary ceasefire, that at least there would be something tangible out of this meeting, because otherwise it's a gift for Putin, and we, the American people, and the Ukrainian people get nothing in return.
Let's talk about the Ukrainians, which are obviously a hugely important factor here. They are the factor, and you speak with them regularly. Zelensky seems to be in a very tough spot here. You can tell me. I mean, he has the president of the United States having this meeting with the Russians. He's barred, as I understand it, in his constitution from ceding any territory in Ukraine. Not that I'm suggesting he should. What is kind of his best outcome of this meeting next Friday?
Well, that the extreme positions that Putin has laid out are not, Trump doesn't come out and say, oh, I think these are great ideas. And I worry about that because, I've been in meetings with President Putin. He's extremely well versed in all these issues. This is, you know, his main issue of his presidency right now. President Trump is not. So I hope that there'll be staff. I hope they won't do much one-on-one time. They did that in Helsinki. We know in 2018 that did not end well for American national interests. But Zelensky is jammed because his people are tired. They don't want this war to go on. They don't want to give up territory. And he knows that eventually there'll probably have to be some kind of agreements, you know, you can imagine something along these lines. They'll never recognize these territories as being part of Russia, but they might agree to pursue unification only through peaceful means. And that could be a kind of trade space. But I want to be clear, lots of Ukrainians won't agree with that, and lots of Ukrainian soldiers won't agree with that. So if President Trump thinks he can just do a deal with Putin and then send an email or put it out on Truth Social, this is what Zelensky needs to accept, he can't do that. It is a democratic country in Ukraine. That would be political suicide for President Zelensky.
But before I let you go, I mean, you mentioned some of this. There's a whole body language and tradecraft to these meetings, especially with Putin. What are you going to be watching for? You mentioned if they are meeting one-on-one, if that's a lengthy one-on-one. What are the other things that will be flags for you, I guess, as we look at this, watch this meeting next Friday?
Can't be assured that they're not seeing again the Kremlin trying to just string them along, to paraphrase President Trump there. This is a matter of days and weeks being important to Russia here. They're seeing progress on the front lines in places that they have made clearly part of their war goals, and it's simply a case of having this diplomatic process continue, avoiding secondary sanctions. It's all a win for Russia at this point, and the pressure, I think, now on President Trump from his European allies, from Ukraine, to go ahead with some kind of consequences for Russia. But just a reminder, back in May, European leaders came here, demanded an unconditional ceasefire, said they had the backing of President Trump and he would impose sanctions with them if that didn't happen. It didn't happen. Trump didn't impose sanctions and instead launched into a lengthy process of talks in Istanbul that ultimately went nowhere. So much of a sense of deja vu here. What is certainly new, though, is Russia's progress on the front lines, which may explain their sudden appetite for talks when they happen, though. The ultimate question here, Paula.
Yeah, in that context, it's incredibly important as we wait to hear more from the White House. Nick Payton-Walsh for us in Kyiv. Sitting where I am right now, I fail to see what the administration could possibly get out of this meeting. They obviously feel differently. Do they know differently? What am I missing here?
Well, Donald Trump has a belief in his magical powers of negotiation. This he said over and over again. He wants to get into a room with Vladimir Putin. He thinks he can end the war. That's what he wants to do. The details, I think, are not big in his mind. I think he's after a big media event. I think he wants a ceasefire. I don't think he cares so much about the war ending so much as it's stopping. And I think Putin, you know, you talked about this deadline. Putin very cleverly, as usual, has bought himself more time. By raising this question of a meeting, he's put off any question of more sanctions on Russia. We don't know exactly what Steve Witkoff discussed with Putin last week or earlier this week that caused this meeting to happen. But clearly, Putin thinks he can get something from it. The discussion may be about lines of defense. If you're going to have a ceasefire, you need to have pullbacks. Russia still wants to take over parts of Ukraine. It hasn't won by military force yet. Ukraine wants to get back parts of its territory, like the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, where Russia's occupied the territory. So there's stuff to change. But I mean, already Donald Trump, even before this, had pretty much conceded to Putin that he could keep the territory that he has right now, and that he could keep Crimea, and that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO. So already lots of concessions were made. The worry, obviously, that Zelensky has is that Putin and Trump will come up with something that they will try to impose on him, and he will be in a very uncomfortable position.
And you can understand why that worry is warranted. You made an interesting point there, that Putin may be interested in stopping the war, but not ending the war. And that's when I turn to sanctions. Do you think the Trump administration will give any teeth to any of the sanctions going forward, whether they are secondary sanctions, whether it's going to be against India or China?
I don't really. I mean, I'd like to be wrong. The Trump people haven't even renewed the sanctions on Russia that are pre-existing to make them more up to date. Trump's angry at India anyway, so he's imposed big tariffs on India, partly because it buys so much Russian oil. He won't do the same with China because tariffs on China are already 50%. So I mean, it's very hard to imagine them going up more. So I think his leverage on Putin is pretty minimal, frankly, but Putin sees Trump as an instrument to get what he wants, which is pressure put on Zelensky, because I don't think Putin's main aims for the war have changed. He wants a Ukraine that is more of a vassal state, that has less military, that won't join NATO, that is much more like Belarus, which he kind of controls, than it is like Poland. And I think that is something Vladimir Putin isn't going to give up on.
MAGA fell for it again. They really actually believed that Trump was going to be tough and strong and stand up to Putin, and you know, Biden was a pushover Trump, and Trump would be both feared and respected by all the countries of the world. And what we've seen is that countries either hate Donald now, or they disrespect him, or they mock him, and often all three of those at the same time. And you don't have to defend Putin to acknowledge that he looks a lot stronger in this moment than Donald Trump. Trump was the one that set up ultimatums and deadlines and this and that, and then these things have passed. And, you know, Putin very wisely baits Donald, because presidents have, in the past, would have these tense conversations with other world leaders, sometimes behind closed doors, like in classified channels, so that if there were discussions that were had, neither of them basically get forced into a political position where they have to act because they've promised the media, and by extension, you know, in front of the media, they've promised the people a certain action. And, you know, members of Congress hear that, voters hear that, the media hears that, and then that creates, you know, a ticking time bomb, basically. There's like, oh, you said in 2 weeks I'm going to get this done. 2 weeks have come and gone. Where the hell's the move, Donald? And Putin knew that if he could just bait Trump into making these stupid public remarks that would then be leaked out to everybody around the world, then Putin would win. Because the reason this is humiliating to Trump, first and foremost, is yes, he's dumb and he's stupid and he's acting like that, but it's because people see it. The reason why the Zelensky meeting from months ago now was so humiliating was that we got to see it. If that meeting happened behind closed doors with no cameras, no video leaking out of that meeting, then Zelensky could have told us what happened, but a number of people wouldn't have believed him. Now, we see it, and Putin has Trump exposed.